In this last module, I think there are three questions that we really need to think about in terms of genetic effects and genetic epidemiology. Those three questions, and ones that really deserve, I think, further study. The first is, are genetic effects constant over time? Most of us think that when you have a gene, it in fact stays turned on and it is pretty constant from the time you take your first breath to the time you take your last. That in fact is not true. Many genes turn on and turn off over time, and so as we're looking for genetic effects, it could very well be that such effects are demonstrated only at particular points in the lifespan. The second question, are genes trait specific? And currently, in the data I showed in the previous module, it's quite clear that that is not the case. Unlike, as again, with certain very strong physical characteristics, such as eye color, stature, hair color, etc., there are specific genes that relate to those and are monozygotic. With many complex traits, that is not the case, and we should keep that in mind. Thirdly, where do we go from here? What are the implications for theory, prevention, and treatment? Let's go back to the first question, changing genetic influence over time. This is a slide that was put together by Danielle Dick at Virginia Commonwealth, and it really does demonstrate the importance of how genes influence drinking and alcohol dependence over time. If you look at the correlation between genetic correlation with drinking, for example, in females at age 14, the correlation is only 0.18. And as time increases during adolescence, or as the person ages during adolescence, you can see that in fact, the genetic correlation does increase over time, and such that in terms of genetic effects of drinking at age 14, it's very small. It's probably primarily environmentally influenced. And as the girl then ages into mid to late adolescence, the genetic correlation in relation to drinking increases really significantly. It almost triples, if you would, such that the correlation is 0.5 in the around 18, 19 years of age. So genes, in fact, and genetic influence does change across time with respect to drinking and the vulnerability for alcohol dependence. Are genes trait specific? Again, going back to our data, one of the things in the COGA study, what we found is that, in fact, many genes contribute to vulnerability and consequently to multiple problems with respect to alcohol dependence, to other substances of use, to depression, to behavioral disorders, etc. So the specificity is a bit problematic, and one of the things that we've learned as time has gone on. However, there are some genes that may in fact be substance specific, and that's the ADH, or the alcohol dehydrogenase gene, that is solely associated with alcohol metabolism. Although there are 7 different ADH genes, each of them really seem to be only associated with alcohol consumption. And what we've seen as well in the previous slide was that the effects of genes may in fact change over time or during the age span. Genes that are very influential in determining onset of drinking or development of regular drinking may in fact turn off and not at all be related to the development of dependence, whether that's related to alcohol dependence, tobacco dependence, etc. So this is a major issue for us in the study of the genetic vulnerability related to alcohol dependence. What is specific and what is general? it could very well be that there are genes that are only general and there are environmental factors that are specific. These are questions that remain to be tested. Ken Kendler published a paper in 2003 that I think is very important, and the KOGA study has in fact replicated this, that there are genetic factor or factors that relate to a variety of other particular psychiatric conditions. For example, the externalizing behaviors with alcohol dependence, with other drug dependence. In fact, for these types of behaviors that may be considered externalizing or impulsive, we could also throw in suicidality here as another factor that seems to share a common genetic basis. What is the interplay between the genes the individual carries with them and the environment in which they live? One of the things that we've seen is that, in fact, rates of alcohol dependence, particularly when we look at the neurotransmitter gene GABA alpha 2, does vary with respect to marital status. For individuals who are not married, the effect of the GABA alpha 2 genotype, in fact, is constant. It doesn't seem to vary at all. But for individuals who are married, the potential effect of this gene is dampened significantly. Where do we go from here with all of this information we've collected? And it certainly is a ton of information. What are some of the implications of our findings? One of the things that we've tried to do is put this together in terms of a heuristic model. And on the left-hand side, you can see what we've done in terms of developing the whole concept of family history or genes, starting off with the notion of a family history, i.e. is there anyone in your family who is affected, and then trying to drill down a little bit with that in terms of looking at the density of the affectation within the family and down to specific genes. And how does this relate to, on the right-hand side, either pathological alcohol or drug use? And in between there are some of the, if you would, some of the intervening variables, some of the environmental factors that may affect this relationship between genes and this complex behavior, complex trait of alcohol, heavy alcohol use, alcohol dependence. And within there you can see the potential, again, factors that may influence the development of this, moving from the gene to the final trait. And some of these things could be behavioral factors such as impulsivity, could be related to cognitive functioning, whether the individual is working at a very high level of cognition or may have some deficits in different areas. Could have to do with the affect the individual displays, whether it's positive or negative, the relationship they have with peers and family. Often peer relationships, family relationships, we know, can either encourage or discourage the use of a particular substance. Also, one of the other factors might have to do with the expectations the individual has with consuming the particular substance, whether there's a positive expectation or a negative expectation. And all of these together, in fact, can influence the development of substance abuse, the vulnerability, and really do intervene between the genes on the left-hand side, whether it's measured through a simple binary trait like family history, or looking at it in a much more complex way through a specific gene, whether it's neurotransmitter, taste sensitivity, etc. What do we know? Well, there are a couple of things that we know. We know for sure that alcohol dependence is highly heritable. But as I said at the beginning, it's not necessarily genetic. Heritability does not equal genes. Many different things that we do, sometimes it's a profession, sometimes it's our religious orientation, or certainly the language we speak, They're all transmitted in families and are heritable in the broad sense of the word. This does not mean that they have a genetic basis. Second thing to certainly remember is that there is no evidence that specific genes predetermine to alcohol dependence or to any other psychiatric condition at this point. And so that when individuals talk about genetic vulnerability, it doesn't mean that, oh, okay, little Bobby, whose father was alcoholic, is certainly, without a doubt, going to become alcohol dependent or have alcohol problems. That's not the case. There are many things that we can do once we have the base information of, i.e., a family history, to help with prevention and develop different programs that may reduce little Bobby's sensitivity to or vulnerability to developing alcohol problems. There's also significant variation in alcohol sensitivity and alcohol tolerance. What is the effect of one drink or two drinks, etc., on the individual? And it is this sensitivity and tolerance that also influence the consumption patterns of individuals and either increase or decrease their likelihood of developing an alcohol-related problem. I think it's also important for us to think about what we might do with this genetic information. And certainly, the better we understand the biological bases of addictive disorders, the better off we are in terms of being able to develop biological treatments, pharmacotherapies for these individuals. If we know particular receptors, if we know particular genes that can be influenced by a pharmacological agent, this would go a long way in helping us with the treatments that we have in place. Also recognize that there are genes that in fact can be protective. Certainly the taste sensitivity is one of those. A second set of genes has to do with the ALDH genes that have to do with the influencing the metabolism of alcoholism and whether or not the person has, if you would, an unpleasant reaction to drinking alcohol. So there are at least some genes that are going to be common across these different related disorders, and it's going to be important for us to recognize what is common, and consequently these in fact may be genes that are less likely for us to influence pharmacologically, but possibly we can influence them through environmental measures, whether those are education programs or other types of things. I think we need to recognize too that there are a variety of behavioral factors, particularly externalizing behaviors, that play a significant role in the etiology of first drink all the way through life and through treatment programs, etc. We know that individuals with externalizing disorders, in fact, are more likely to be risk takers. They're more likely to be individuals who begin their drinking very early in their life and are likely to continue to do so. Environmental factors play a role without a doubt, and this is not different from other common diseases. Could very well be that dietary factors influence the vulnerability for developing a substance use disorder, including alcohol, and this is not at all different from heart disease, diabetes, and other common medical disorders. So the identification of protective and susceptibility genes can lead to the development of a variety of targeted, not general, but targeted prevention and intervention that work. And it is through this work using a variety of different studies, genetic epidemiology being one, that will lead us forward in our efforts at prevention and intervention.